Welcome to Freethought Matters. I'm Annie Laurie Gaylord.
And I'm Dan Barker. We are co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which works to uphold the constitutional principle of separation between state and church.
FFRF also serves as the nation's largest association of freethinkers, individuals who are free from religion. We'd love to have you join us at ffrf.org.
Or you can ask for a complimentary issue of our newspaper, Freethought Today.
Among the leading humanists and nonbelievers is Anthony B. Pinn, a professor of humanities and religion at Rice University. Anthony Pinn has authored or edited over 35 books, including Writing God's Obituary and When Colorblindness Isn't The Answer, Humanism and the Challenge of Race. Anthony Pinn received FFRF's Emperor Has No Clothes Award at our recent national convention, where Dan had the opportunity to sit down and talk with him.
So, Tony, Dr. Pinn, what a pleasure to have you here. You've written more books, I think, than there are books of the New Testament. I mean, what do you have, like 30 books or something, or 20?
Between the ones that I've edited and the ones that I've authored, about 35, 36.
Yeah, and so you focus on religion, humanism, and race in America primarily, and I bet you're a popular professor there at Rice University.
Well, the students like some of the classes because some of them are outside the box. So, for example, I teach a course with a hip-hop artist on religion and hip-hop.
Wow.
And so it gives the students a way to kind of think critically about an element of their cultural lives, something that they don't necessarily see on a university campus. So for them, that's cool.
He does hip hop in the classroom?
No, man. This is a regular course, and so there's no performing. And while the semester he's teaching, he won't be involved in any entertainment activities on campus because students have to take him seriously for what he offers. My argument is, at Rice, they need to think beyond the hedges, and they need to rethink who is qualified to provide information. And this is an internationally known Grammy-nominated artist who ought to be appreciated for what he thinks, not simply what he raps.
But could he say, meet me outside after class and I'll do a little bit of my act?
No, none of that.
Oh,
none
okay.
of that.
Oh, you have to be professional. So you and I have a lot in common. We were both preachers, and you were raised in a strict fundamentalist Pentecostal. You and I both spoke in tongues.
Yes.
Which we're not going to do here.
No.
No, that would be kind of weird. We would need a translator. Bruce, you could have some translation from tongue speaking. But you really believed it. You wrote a book telling your story, Writing God's Obituary, how a good Methodist became a better atheist. And you usually call yourself a humanist, secular humanist, but atheist is part of that.
It fits as well. Yeah.
So what happened? You went to a Christian school and you went to the church and all that. Something must have happened in your life to cause this change.
Well, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and my mother's side of the family, deeply religious, so church was part of life. In fact, church was a second family. We spent a significant amount of time beyond Sunday at that church. I mean, you know what that's like.
Yeah.
And so it was really important.
Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and then all these revival meetings and
activities for children, there was choir rehearsal. I mean, the whole gambit. And so it was deeply important to me. And I think reflecting back, one of the ways I tried to express the importance of that community was through this call to ministry. And so I started really young, helping with the order of service, lining the hymns, opening the doors of the church, leading prayers, that sort of thing. And before I could vote or even go to the store alone, I started preaching. I was ordained as I was entering college and just assumed that this would be part of my life. I had gone to a rather fundamentalist high school because my understanding was I needed to be in the world but not of it. So I left a really good public school where critical thinking skills were highlighted and rewarded to this fundamentalist school in which critical thinking skills were frowned upon. It's what the Bible says, not what do you think. It was a feeder school for institutions like Bob Jones University. Do I need to say anything after that? And so I went to New York to go to school and had no critical thinking skills. I had to learn how to critically engage the world
Because
again.
at the Christian school, they teach you how not to think, how to obey, how to follow.
It's unimportant. What does the Bible say? Follow the teachings in Scripture, right? That you take this thing literally, that the blueprint for life is right there. What's to analyze? Just do what the Bible says.
But then something happened in your brain.
Well, I'm in New York. I'm working at a church in Brooklyn, and I'm in New York as crack cocaine is on the rise. So I'm seeing a kind of deeply depressing dimension of life, right? A kind of loss of hope. I'm encountering young people who are having an easier time planning out their funerals than thinking about the prospects of a bright future. And what I had to offer in terms of theology, what I had to offer in terms of ministry, made no difference. I was answering questions that they really weren't asking. And so slowly, I started rethinking my religious engagement. It started first by me assuming I was getting this wrong, right? That I really didn't understand what God was trying to bring to us, that I was misunderstanding how God interacts with the world, but that wasn't satisfying. So it was a slow departure from this deep commitment to the church, some critical distance from it. I was still interested in ministry, but I was thinking about ministry not along Pentecostal lines anymore, that my model for ministry was now Adam Clayton Powell Jr., right, who thought that this is an opportunity to do something real in the material world, that the church, the theology is one thing, but its ability to impact quality of life is quite another. I was moving in that direction, but I knew I had to get out of New York, get away from this church family in order to really think this.
Because theology doesn't really have any practical uses on the street where the problems were.
Well, my theology had a component that involved ethics, but that component that involved ethics was all about how to get people to heaven, as opposed to how to make their physical circumstances healthy and life-affirming. So I was talking about something that did not address what young people were encountering day after day after day. They were living in death-dealing circumstances, and I'm telling them about getting their soul right.
But to go from that kind of thinking to saying you're an atheist, I mean, how did that happen?
Well, I was interested in ministry, but I wanted to think about it differently. So I left New York and went to Harvard Divinity School, where ministry was not the priority.
Half of them are atheists already, right?
And quiet about it, right? But it wasn't about ministry, so it gave me an opportunity to think. I was still involved in church ministry. I was working at a church in Roxbury and encountering, again, young people who had no sense of future.
Yeah.
No sense of future. And nothing about their church involvement gave them a way to think differently. And so it reached a point for me where I had to make a decision. I was going to safeguard a tradition, or I was going to be about the business of trying to help people live productive and healthy lives. Yeah. And so I was willing to be a lot of things, but I was not going to be a hypocrite. So I could not stay in a pulpit preaching what I did not believe. So I left the church, and for a time I wasn't quite certain what to call myself. Right? I didn't have very many role models. Certainly role models that looked like me, I did not have.
A human being, I guess, is one start.
Well, that I could, but even in the context of the United States, for an African American, that was not a safe assumption, right? Everything about our collective lives spoke against the humanity of despised populations, of racialized populations. So even that was a challenge. It was with time that I recognized that where I stood and how I stood was in line with humanism and atheism. And so that's what I claimed.
Wow. Well, you tell the story very well in this book, Writing God's Obituary, which means that God's dead, basically,
yes.
Right? So you write the obituary, tell the story in great depth of the inner struggles, which I can relate to also as a former minister. We're going to take a break in a second here, but after the break I want to talk about your work at the intersection of humanism and race and how all that works. And you've written some good books about this whole question of religious identity and racial identity in that. So we'll be back right after the break with more Freethought Matters.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist, and I'm alarmed by the intrusions of religion into our secular government. That's why I'm asking you to support the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics, working to keep state and church separate, just like our founding fathers intended. Please support the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
I'm Chris Calvey, and I am proud to be an out-of-the-closet atheist. Hi, I'm Chris, and I may look like Jesus, but I'm an atheist. And you know, atheists are sometimes accused of leading lives that are cold and bleak and meaningless, but that's not the way I see it. To me, I don't believe that there's an afterlife. And that realization that this might be the only chance we have makes my life feel incredibly important every day. Also, knowing that help is not going to come from above imparts on me a profound sense of urgency to work together to solve the world's problems and alleviate human suffering. That's why my purpose in life is to try and leave planet Earth a little bit better than it was the way I found it. I'm a graduate student, I'm studying microbiology, and I'm trying to develop renewable biofuels before it's too late.
Thank you for watching Freethought Matters. You can find more content by the Freedom from Religion Foundation at our website, FFRF.org. Follow FFRF on Facebook, and you'll get notifications about all of our content, including whenever we go live on FFRF's Ask an Atheist. FFRF is also on YouTube, where all of our programs, including this show and our weekly news bites, are available to watch anytime. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you on the web.
And welcome back to Freethought Matters. I'm Dan Barker, co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. We're continuing our conversation with Dr. Tony Pinn, who gave a wonderful talk at our 42nd annual convention in Madison, Wisconsin this fall. And let's just look at a little bit of that talk that Dr. Pinn gave us.
I'm not trying to close churches, mosques, and synagogues. What you want to do on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that is your personal business. But the public arena, public space should not be restricted, should not be strangled by the theological claims and wishes of any particular population. It's bigger than that. It's more robust than that. It requires a grammar and a language of life that allows us to live out our best ideals. It requires a grammar and language of life that allows us to take seriously what Thoreau tried to teach us to do, to live deliberately, so that at the end we what? Know that we have lived.
So, humanism and atheism and Christianity and religion and theism and race, they intersect. You've written a number of books about that, including The End of God Talk, an African-American humanist theology. You've written many other things. And most recently, a book about, what's the title? Colorblindness?
Colorblindness Isn't The Answer.
Colorblindness Isn't The Answer. So those of us who are non-theistic, especially in the Freethought movement, humanist, atheist, and whatever movement, what should we be thinking about when it comes to race and religion?
Well, Dan, it's as simple as this, that from my perspective, humanism has an obligation to think in terms of quality of life, to address the issues that prevent communities from living fully. And within the context of the United States, one of those undeniable issues is the issue of race, and it is deeply connected to free thought or humanism, right? So, for example, I've not met very many humanists or atheists who don't speak fondly of Thomas Jefferson. But in claiming Thomas Jefferson, humanists and atheists and free thoughts claim a legacy of sexual violence and racism.
Especially coming from Virginia, like he did.
Shouldn't we say something about this, right? So it seems to me we have an obligation, if for no other reason to better understand what we claim, we have an obligation to address issues of race. And for me, this is both professional and personal. On the personal level, I needed to kind of figure out how I fit into this history of humanism within the context of the United States. And most of the material available to me wrote me out. It did not highlight people who looked like me. And so I needed to do some work building on what folks like Norm Allen had done to kind of figure out the place of African Americans in this larger U.S. tradition of humanism.
Because Norm Allen had gone through some of the black and minority writers and thinkers of history who have made such a great contribution. And regarding Jefferson, you're right. You know, we kind of have this knee-jerk, well, those were the times. You know, I mean, he did the best he could at the time. But in the Declaration of Independence, he even disparaged the Native Americans, the merciless savages he talked about in there. So it wasn't just the slaves that he had.
Right.
Those people back then who did a great job of founding our country were still flawed in so many ways that we haven't got over yet, is what you're saying.
And I understand that he was a man of his times, but if we look at that period, there were others who were critical of the enslavement of Africans. So another way of thinking was readily available to him. And his writings would suggest that he understood his position as being troubled and troubling. Right? So again, the idea was to think through this history in a way that surfaced African American participation. And so for me, that is the linchpin in terms of humanism and race. I also needed to give some attention as a scholar of religion to the relationship between humanism and religion. And lots of people have misunderstood what I was trying to get at with this. So in some of my writings, I suggest that humanism or atheism qualify as a religious orientation. And as you might imagine, people don't like that.
Well, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, right? So to use the word religion.
But it requires a broader understanding of what religion is. Religion is simply a binding together. That is to say, religion at its core is simply an effort to make life meaningful. It does not require God or gods. And to the extent humanists and atheists work to make life meaningful, it's an orientation that one could consider religious, not theistic, but religious.
At least under the law, the freedom of religion includes those of us who are not religious. So that word religion includes us. Even if you're non-religious, that's a religious stance.
And what does that mean then for us? Right? And so for me, it's a way of getting at the softer, so to speak, elements of my orientation. So for example, it provides a way of thinking about how humanists and atheists participate in ritual. And I've gotten a lot of pushback on that. We're not concerned with this. But yes, if we think about ritual as simply repeated activities in founded space, our getting together annually is a ritual practice. Our sense of community involves this appreciation for making life meaningful and ritualizing those elements of life. We have a sense of what we ought to do for each other when we experience loss, or when we encounter something that is so wonderful and life-affirming. We know what to do about that.
The birth of a child or a wedding or any of these natural...
Exactly.
So what you seem to be suggesting is that if humanists and atheists would be offering more of these positives to minorities, that they would be more attracted to it, because the only thing that's doing it is the church right now. And we seem not to be doing that for them.
It's dominated by the church, but in the church it comes with great cost. So, for example, trans members of churches, gays and lesbians in churches, get some of that community, but at an expense. And that expense involves accepting a diminished sense of themselves.
Because worship is, you are everything and I'm nothing. You are the slave master and I am your servant. I mean, that's the whole idea in most of the churches.
And the typical read of the Bible within these churches demonizes marginalized populations. And so it comes with great sacrifice. And so here's the issue for me. Humanists and atheists who are wondering how they diversify, one, provide people with a soft place to land. They already know there are problems with Christianity, with Islam, with Judaism. They already know this. But the question is, what do we offer them as an alternative? What kind of community do we offer them, as opposed to simply providing them with ways to critique what they're already not persuaded by?
Yeah, exactly. So there's a minus side and a plus side to humanism. The minus is getting rid of the garbage, but then what's the plus? What are we offering to people? I was fascinated by your book, Colorblindness is Not the Answer, because on the one hand, there's a tendency to think that, well, it's an equal country, we're all the same, right? So let's just ignore race. I mean, let's just all treat each other like equal. But on the other hand, you seem to be saying we should not be ignoring race. Like a wealthy person is likely to say, money's not important. But to the poor person, money's really important. If you have the wealth, you think, well, it's not a big deal. So people who live in a society of white privilege might be thinking, well, race is not a big deal because, we live in a free country. You're suggesting that we need to make it and keep it a big deal because it's a problem.
I'm saying something slightly different, that whether we acknowledge it or not, it is a big deal. And to pretend as if it isn't is to contribute to the problem. Right? To pretend as if it isn't puts us in line with communities and orientations that we critique. To the extent we try to deny the significance of race, we highlight and safeguard whiteness as normative, and that makes us no different than the Southern Baptists we shake our fist at. So I'm saying that if humanism and atheism are going to matter, they have to have, as part of their very DNA, a commitment to social justice. And this commitment to social justice has to include a critique of racism.
So what should I do, and what should we... I'm an American Indian, a member of the tribe, but for all practical purposes, I live as a white person. They call me an apple, red on the outside, white on the inside. But what should I do, and what should groups like ours do to acknowledge or not ignore this race problem in our activities?
The most radical move, it seems to me, for all humanist and atheist organizations is to make a commitment to social justice an explicit element of their mission. And that way, if they don't do this work well, they have failed as organizations. It's not an add-on. It's part of who they are at a fundamental level. Outside of that kind of radical shift, one thing that needs to be recognized is that white privilege is real. And that it isn't simply a matter of economics.
Yeah.
Right? When folks say white privilege is real, they're not simply pointing out white people having money. There's an understanding that there are poor white people in the United States. But here is the difference. It's a matter of orientation. It's a matter of perspective, that within the context of the United States, whites who aren't doing well, it is not assumed that it's because they are inherently inferior. There's an assumption that the system isn't working for them. Racialized minorities, the assumption is they're not doing well because they don't have the capacity to. That's a significant difference. We have to recognize that.
Yeah, and you quote Martin Luther King Jr. when he talked about Sunday morning. What did he say is the most
segregated hour of the week?
Yeah, if you're thinking about a church on Sunday morning, most of them are going to be of a certain color. There are some integrated churches here and there, some of the mega churches, but even there, there's still an implicit idea that the real Christians, the picture, like Jeremiah Kamara says in his films, when you see the pictures of Jesus everywhere, what color is Jesus, right? You rarely see a black Jesus. Of course, assuming that Jesus even existed, right? Even a non-fiction person can have a color, can have a skin color. So that is a problem. So
yeah. But Martin Luther King Jr. and I respond to that differently. For him, it was a fundamental concern. For me, that's a matter of private activity, and we cannot legislate personal preference. What we can do is legislate in such a way as to hamper the ability of personal preference to harm the life chances of others. And so my major concern is not what's happening on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday as the religious get together, but what is happening within the context of public life, of public space. How do we decrease the impact that religious organizations and their theologies are having on public engagement, that their theology, their understanding of the world, their sense of morals and ethics should not shape how we live as a country.
And not talk down to minorities as if they were so dumb that they need religious talk in order for them to follow along. There's this assumption that most minorities are religious, although I just heard from Pew that Hispanics are now less than 50% Roman Catholic now, so that's changing a bit as well. A whole lot of, like with Mandisa Thomas and Black Nonbelievers, a whole lot of minorities are now coming out and addressing the world, as you want to do, with humanistic values rather than Christian values.
Right.
So
I also think we have to recognize, if we take African Americans as an example, what it claims to be religious is flexible. It's a kind of fluid-like concept, right? So you've got a lot of African Americans who are humanist or atheist or free thinkers in terms of orientation who maintain church membership for a variety of reasons that have nothing to do with an embrace of the theology. They maintain this affiliation, one, because it provides cultural connection. It provides social outlets. It provides economic networking. And it's a space in which they don't have to explain to anyone why they're angry.
well, thank you, Dr. Pinn, Tony. I was especially impressed with your book, Colorblindness Is Not The Answer, and you are to be congratulated for helping to move society forward through your work, through your books, and through your writing. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks for the chat.
And thank you for watching Free Thought Matters, because free thought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.